Welcome to our global news roundup. We have a packed agenda today. Everything from targeted killings and devastating storms to major power shifts.
We'll kick things off in Moscow. A high-ranking Russian general, Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov, was killed in what appears to be a targeted attack.
And this is significant because...
Well, he wasn't just any general. Kirillov was the head of Russia's nuclear, biological, and chemical defense forces. And the fact that this happened inside Russia is a pretty big deal.
Ukrainian sources are claiming responsibility.
They're calling him a legitimate target.
Why?
He was accused by the West of overseeing the use of chemical weapons in Ukraine and even charged in absentia for war crimes. The method of the attack is also worth noting.
How was he killed?
A device planted in an electric scooter, detonated remotely.
Wow, that's chilling.
It fits a pattern of targeted attacks within Russia recently, like the assassination of that missile scientist not too long ago.
Makes you wonder what's going on internally.
Yeah, definitely. Some experts think Kirillov's death could be tied to power struggles within the Russian military, or even a cover-up of war crimes.
Adding another layer of complexity to an already complicated situation.
Absolutely. It really highlights the volatile nature of power dynamics in Russia and how the war's consequences are reaching far beyond the battlefield.
Definitely a lot to unpack there. Let's shift our focus to the Middle East now. We're seeing a dramatic power shift in Syria following the collapse of the Assad regime.
Yeah, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS for short, has taken control. They're a group with, let's say, a controversial history, and now they're trying to maintain order amidst the chaos.
I imagine that's not an easy task.
Not at all. They're facing huge challenges, especially in gaining the trust of a population that's been under Assad's rule for so long.
A lot of people, especially minorities who are aligned with the Assad regime, must be pretty scared right now.
You're absolutely right. The situation in Latakia, the Alawite heartland, is a perfect example of that tension. We're hearing reports of property seizures and violence against Alawites.
Any specific examples?
Well, there's a story of Noor, an Alawite woman whose home was seized by rebel fighters. HTS actually intervened and returned her property.
That's good.
It is. But she still fears for her safety. Shows you the complex reality on the ground there. HTS is trying to present itself as a stabilizing force, but there's a lot of deep-seated fear and mistrust to overcome.
Definitely a tough situation. Switching gears now to a different kind of story, Cyclone Chido has left a path of destruction in Mozambique and the French territory of Mayotte.
It was one of the most intense storms on record. Winds up to 160 miles per hour, the death toll is rising, and the infrastructure damage is extensive.
What's the situation like in Mozambique specifically?
Dire. Over 34,000 families have been displaced, and this is a region that was already dealing with poverty and the aftermath of previous cyclones, not to mention the ongoing violence from those Islamist militants.
It's heartbreaking. What about Mayotte?
Hundreds are feared dead, and many are still missing. The damage to infrastructure is so severe that it's actually hindering rescue efforts. And there's a serious concern that the death toll could be much higher because of a large, undocumented immigrant population who might not have sought shelter.
This is a tragic reminder of how vulnerable marginalized communities are during natural disasters.
Absolutely. It underscores the need for inclusive disaster preparedness plans that take everyone's needs into account. Now, for a quick look at some other developing stories around the world.
Okay, let's hear them.
Vanuatu was hit by a powerful 7.3 magnitude earthquake. Early reports indicate significant damage in the capital, including to Western embassies. There are unconfirmed reports of casualties.
I imagine the remote location makes things even more challenging.
Absolutely. The country's remoteness and limited resources are definitely going to complicate rescue and recovery efforts.
Any other news?
Mexico is dealing with the return of a notorious figure from its drug war. Ociel Cardenas Guillen, the founder of the Los Zetas cartel, was deported back to Mexico after serving a 25-year sentence in the U.S.
What's the significance of his return?
Well, Cardenas was known for his brutality. He transformed Los Zetas from an elite group of soldiers into a ruthless criminal organization, and he still faces charges in Mexico.
So his return could destabilize things?
Potentially, yes. It could reignite violence and shake up the criminal landscape there.
Well, let's hope that doesn't happen. What else is going on?
Some good news for anti-whaling activists. Paul Watson, the founder of the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, has been released from jail in Greenland. Denmark rejected Japan's extradition request.
Remind me why he was detained.
He He was arrested back in July based on charges from a 2010 incident where he allegedly interfered with Japanese whaling activities. So his release is a setback for Japan's efforts to prosecute him for his anti-whaling actions.
Interesting. What else?
Turning our attention to the tech world, Apple is facing some legal issues in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The government filed criminal complaints accusing the company of using conflict minerals in its products.
What exactly are they alleging?
They say Apple knowingly sourced minerals from mines controlled by armed groups in eastern Congo, contributing to human rights abuses and fueling the conflict. Apple, of course, denies these allegations, stating they are committed to responsible sourcing.
A lot at stake for Apple's reputation there. What other news do we have?
In Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is under pressure to resign after a series of political missteps. It all culminated with a public feud with his former finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, who resigned earlier this week.
What led to her resignation?
Disagreements over how to handle Donald Trump's threatened tariffs on Canadian goods. This whole thing has exposed deep divisions within the Liberal Party and raised questions about Trudeau's leadership. Opposition parties are calling for his resignation and a new election.
Sounds like a very turbulent time for Canadian politics.
It is. And sadly, we have to report another school shooting in the U.S., this one in Wisconsin.
Oh no, not another one.
I know. This one at a private school left 2 dead, including the 15-year-old suspect, and 6 others injured.
What was the motive?
The police say it appears to be a combination of factors, but the investigation is ongoing. This event has understandably shaken the community and reignited calls for stricter gun control and better mental health support.
It's a conversation that needs to happen, that's for sure. Is there any good news to report?
Actually, yes. Bollywood actress Taboo is making quite a name for herself in Hollywood.
Really? What's she been in?
She has a role in the latest Dune prophecy film.
Interesting.
And her role actually highlights a larger trend of women gaining prominence in global film and TV productions. It's a positive shift that's been gaining momentum across the entertainment industry.
That's great to hear. Some positive news amidst all the heavy stuff we've been discussing.
Exactly.
Well, that wraps up the first part of our news roundup. We'll be back shortly with more news and analysis.
Down in South America, Argentina's new president is turning heads.
Javier Milei, right?
Yeah, that's the one. He's a libertarian, and he's already making some radical economic changes.
Like what?
Think spending cuts, slashing subsidies, pushing for privatization. The whole 9 yards? He's drawn praise from some pretty high-profile figures.
Who are we talking about?
Elon Musk, for one. And of course, Donald Trump.
Not surprising given their shared economic philosophies.
Exactly. Musk sees Milei as a potential model for reducing government bureaucracy. But not everyone's convinced. Some analysts are cautioning against drawing too many comparisons between Argentina and, say, the U.S.
What are their concerns?
They argue that Argentina's economic situation is so dire that these drastic measures are necessary, but they might not work elsewhere.
Fair point. But it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out.
Absolutely. Milei's success or failure could have ripple effects on similar movements in other countries. It's definitely a case study to watch.
And it's not just his economic policies that are raising eyebrows.
Right. He's also a vocal critic of what he calls the woke agenda, aligning himself with cultural battles we're seeing in the U.S. and other parts of the world.
So he's combining economic libertarianism with socially conservative values.
Exactly. And that's proving to be a potent political force.
But I imagine he's facing his fair share of opposition, too.
Oh, absolutely. Those who believe his policies will harm the most vulnerable are pushing back hard. And his confrontational style isn't winning him any favors either.
It's always a tough balancing act for leaders who try to implement radical change.
No doubt. They often face the most resistance from those who benefit from the status quo. Only time will tell if Milei can maintain public support as he pushes his agenda forward.
Speaking of pushback, the information war in Ukraine is heating up. Social media is right at the center of it.
Yeah, Palestinian news outlets are accusing Facebook, or Meta as they're now called, of restricting their reach during the Israel-Gaza conflict.
What kind of evidence is there to support that claim?
Well, the BBC did some research that showed a significant decline in engagement for Palestinian news pages on Facebook after the Hamas attacks last year.
And what about Israeli news pages?
They saw a big increase in engagement during the same period.
So there's a potential bias in Facebook's algorithms?
That's what some people are alleging. Meta denies any intentional suppression, of course. They say they just implemented temporary measures to address hateful content and comply with U.S. sanctions against Hamas.
But is that the whole story?
Not quite. Leaked internal documents from Instagram, which is also owned by Meta, revealed that they made algorithm changes that specifically targeted comments from Palestinian users. Those comments were more likely to be flagged and removed.
That's pretty damning evidence.
It is, and it raises serious questions about the transparency and accountability of these tech giants, especially in conflict zones where reliable information is so crucial. We need more scrutiny of how their policies impact the flow of information and how they shape public narratives around these sensitive geopolitical issues.
Let's move on to a different kind of conflict now. The murder trial of Luigi Mangione, the man accused of killing healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, is underway in the U.S.
Right. Mangini is facing a first-degree murder charge.
What's the potential sentence?
Life in prison without parole if he's convicted. This case is attracting a lot of attention.
Why is that?
Well, partly because of the high-profile victim. Thompson was a very powerful figure in the healthcare industry.
And what are the details of the crime?
Prosecutors allege that Mangini traveled to New York using a fake ID and shot Thompson in what they're calling a frightening, well-planned, and targeted murder.
Sounds premeditated.
It does. And there's another disturbing element to this case.
What's that?
Some people online are actually celebrating Mangini. They see him as a hero for killing a powerful corporate executive.
Well, that's messed up.
It is. The NYPD commissioner even had to publicly condemn this glorification of violence.
What's the evidence against Mangini?
Pretty strong. They found his fingerprints at the crime scene, and they also recovered a ghost gun when he was arrested in Pennsylvania. He's facing additional charges there as well.
Does he have a defense?
His lawyer maintains his innocence, but we'll have to see how the trial unfolds.
Let's shift gears now and talk about Syria. The process of uncovering mass graves from the Assad regime is underway.
It's a grim but necessary task. Over 100,000 people disappeared during the conflict.
What happened to them?
It's believed that many were tortured and killed in regime prisons, and their bodies were dumped in unmarked graves. Now that the regime has fallen, these mass graves are being unearthed.
Do we have any first-hand accounts of what happened?
We do. There are witnesses who describe truckloads of bodies being brought for burial without any regard for religious rites or identification.
Horrific.
Absolutely. There's a religious leader in Qatefa who witnessed the burial of hundreds of bodies in refrigerated containers. He described the ground being filled with corpses and then bulldozed over.
It's hard to even imagine how many bodies have been found so far.
The Syrian Emergency Task Force estimates that nearly 100,000 bodies have been recovered. But the search is ongoing.
What needs to happen now?
These mass graves need to be protected. Thorough investigations need to be conducted, and the remains need to be identified. It's a monumental task that requires international expertise and resources. The International Criminal Court and human rights organizations are calling for documentation of these crimes and accountability for those responsible.
Let's hope justice is served. Switching gears back to Canadian politics now, it seems the fallout from Chrystia Freeland's resignation continues.
Absolutely. Her departure has really exposed deep divisions within the Liberal Party, and the calls for Trudeau's resignation are getting louder.
What are the opposition parties saying?
They're demanding that he step down and call for a new election. They argue that his economic management has been a disaster.
And what's Trudeau's response?
He's refusing to resign. He claims that he still has the support of his party and a mandate to govern.
So his political future is hanging in the balance.
It is. And to add fuel to the fire, Canada's provincial leaders are meeting to discuss a united front against Trump's trade threats.
They're worried about a trade war.
They are. They're determined to protect their interests. This whole situation really highlights the fragility of Canada's political system and the challenges it faces in today's turbulent global landscape.
Back in the U.S., the debate over gun control and school safety is back in the spotlight after another tragic shooting.
The shooting at that private Christian school in Wisconsin is a stark reminder of the work that still needs to be done.
2 dead, including the 15-year-old suspect, and 6 others injured. It's heartbreaking.
It is. The police are saying the motive is complex. They're asking for anyone with information to come forward.
This has to stop. What can be done?
We need a national conversation about gun control. A real, honest conversation. And it needs to involve everyone. Lawmakers, law enforcement, educators, parents, and students.
We need to find solutions that protect the right to bear arms while ensuring the safety and well-being of all citizens, especially our children.
Exactly. On a more positive note, it's encouraging to see the entertainment industry making strides in terms of female representation, especially in science fiction and fantasy.
The latest Dune Prophecy film is a good example of that.
It is. It has a female-centric storyline, and women play prominent roles both in front of and behind the camera.
That's great to hear.
Bollywood actress Taboo actually stars in the film and spoke about how empowering it was to work on a project where women take center stage.
It's a trend we're seeing more and more, and it's a positive one.
Absolutely. It's crucial for representation, for challenging gender roles, and for expanding creative possibilities.
And a much-needed change that's long overdue.
Agreed. Now, let's circle back to Argentina and President Milei. This time, we'll focus on his views on trade and how they might clash with the incoming Trump administration.
Interesting. Tell me more.
Milei is a staunch advocate for free trade. He's even criticized his own regional trade bloc, Mercosur, for preventing countries from striking individual deals.
That's a pretty bold stance.
It is, and it puts him at odds with Trump, who's all about protectionism. Remember, Trump has vowed to renegotiate the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement to prioritize American jobs.
So we have a classic clash of ideologies here. Free market versus nationalist protectionism.
Exactly. And this difference of opinion could have a real impact on the relationship between the U.S. and Argentina, especially considering their economic ties.
It'll be interesting to see if they can find common ground.
We'll have to wait and see. But it's a reminder that the global economy is in constant flux, and there are many competing forces at play. It's definitely encouraging, these positive changes, and not just in Hollywood, but globally.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of global trends, we were talking about Argentina's new president, Javier Milei. His views on trade could lead to some real fireworks with the incoming Trump administration.
Yeah, Miley's a big free trade guy, like really big on it. He's even criticized his own regional trade bloc, Mercosur, for, preventing countries from making their own deals.
That's pretty bold, taking on your own trade bloc like that.
Yeah, it is. And it puts him directly at odds with Trump, who, as we know, is all about protectionism, America first and all that.
Right. Trump's already said he wants to renegotiate the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, put American jobs first. So it's free market versus nationalist protectionism.
Yep, classic clash of ideologies. And it could have a real impact on U.S.-Argentina relations, especially given how much they do business with each other.
Will they find common ground, do you think, or is this going to be a source of tension?
Tough to say. We'll have to see how it plays out, but it's a good reminder that the global economy is always changing, always in flux, and there are powerful forces pushing and pulling in different directions.
Absolutely. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? War, political intrigue, natural disasters, economic turmoil. But we've also seen some glimmers of hope. The world's a complicated place.
It is full of challenges, but also opportunities, and it's changing faster than ever before.
The important thing is to stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking questions.
Couldn't agree more.
Thanks for joining us for this Global News Roundup. We'll be back soon with more.